Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Foundation section in Christian Ambassador Training. My name is David Gilmore, and I'm a writer and speaker with Legati Christi. And when I gave the course overview a few lessons ago, I mentioned that we would be using apologetics as part of the classes that we do. Apologetics isn't a term that many people know these days, so I think it's kind of important that we take some time and go through a definition of what apologetics is and what that kind of looks like. You'll notice that apologetics sounds a lot like what we would call an apology. And when I say that word, you're probably thinking of a time when you said you were sorry for doing something. And the I'm sorry typically follows up with reasons on why you did what you did. The word apology comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a defense or to make your case. But apologetics isn't where we say, I'm sorry for being a Christian. It is where we give reasons for why we believe what we believe, though. We get the mandate to do apologetics from 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter writes, "But in your hearts regard Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." Now, that part where it says make a defense, that's the Greek word apologia. In ancient Rome and Greece, an apology was something like a legal brief. What you would do is you'd get up in front of the court, or you'd write into a magistrate, and you'd make your case about something. And it wasn't where you said you were sorry. You weren't throwing yourself on the mercy of the court or saying that you were guilty. What you were doing is you believed that you were in the right for the thing that happened or the position that you held, and you were pleading your case. So why should we use apologetics? You may have heard someone tell you that you can't argue someone into the kingdom. And usually that comes from someone who would say that you just have to show them God's love and let him do the rest. And while it is true that we need to show non-believers love and an attractive character and also be welcoming, the two things aren't mutually exclusive. So to say someone can't be argued into the kingdom is just wrong. I know a lot of people who needed to hear reasons for why Christianity is true before they would open up to the message of the gospel. And that includes me. I had to have arguments and be somewhat argued into the kingdom before I was saved. And doing apologetics serves a few different purposes. First, it shapes the culture. Most of the West is largely post-Christian. Church attendance is declining in most places like Europe, Canada, and the US. And a lot of that has to do with the idea that faith and reason are two opposing forces. Like, you can't have both. You have to take a side here. And that stems mostly from a period of history that's known as the Enlightenment. And that was in the 17th and 18th centuries. In that time, they detached reason from things like theology and monarchies. And in fact, another name for the Enlightenment period is also called the Age of Reason. And this movement had a tremendous impact on how society sees religion today. Theology and things like the Bible are no longer considered sources of knowledge, and reason and science are the king, right? And also, part of the history of the church in America is its unfortunate retreat behind closed doors in the early 20th century. As new scientific discoveries were being made, rather than kind of come alongside of science and offer ways in which Christianity and science they line up, the church largely withdrew from the public sectors like politics, education, and the arts. Christians kept their beliefs to themselves or confined to their churches. And when they did that, Christianity kind of stopped being a viable explanation and influence on the culture. So non-Christians weren't hearing about it, and Christians stopped talking about it openly. So one of the purposes of apologetics is to present the Christian worldview to the rest of the world as a viable option that explains a lot about how the world actually works. The more Christians are able to articulate what it is that they believe, and the more they're able to give strong reasons for why they believe it, the more the culture at large will be influenced by those reasons. And let's face it, one thing that Christians love to do is gripe about the culture and how bad it's gotten. We complain about the state of the family. We complain about education system. We complain about the entertainment industry. We complain about the news media. We complain about a lot of things. Well, how can we expect to fix the problems that we see if we don't know how to engage with it? When we want to discuss issues of marriage, we can't lead with the Bible says, because people don't trust the Bible anymore. And again, we can and should eventually get to the Bible, but we have to be careful when we choose to start there. Apologetics helps us have those discussions about cultural issues we see that need to be solved. And we can already see this happening today. In his book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Justin Brierley outlines how the new atheism movement of the early 2000s has largely failed, and people are seeking after God again. He gives an account of how many cultural influencers like Jordan Peterson, Tom Holland, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali are talking about how the Christian story has influenced the world, and how the Christian story has led to the prosperity of the West. Even staunch critics like Joe Rogan and even Richard Dawkins have toned down their rhetoric, and they've begun to see how the ideals that Christianity promotes are often the ones that lead to the best societies. So it's important that we be able to engage with the culture at large as a way to open the door to the gospel and have influence on it. The second reason we should use apologetics is to clear a way for the cross. Today, we live in an ultra-skeptical, increasingly secular culture where more and more people don't trust the Bible anymore. And I brought this up a second ago, like just saying the Bible tells me so, or I just feel it's right, that isn't enough. We can't appeal to the Bible as an authority when they think of it as some like old, outdated book that's full of myths and legends. We have to be able to give well thought out reasons for what we believe that both speak God's truth and communicate it in a language that others are open to hearing. The good news is to get the conversation started, you don't even have to quote a single passage from the Bible most times. We can give reasons for God's existence, we can give reasons for the evidence of life of Jesus, and proof that we have the right books in the Bible without even having to throw out a single verse. This quote from Dr. Os Guinness is one of my favorites, and it just about sums up the reason we as Christians need to use apologetics in order to spread the gospel today. He says, apologetics is pre-evangelism, which is communication that clarifies what is obscuring and obstructing the good news. And in this sense, it is the necessary foreword or preface wherever there is indifference or complacency or resistance or hostility. It is the intellectual, moral, spiritual brush clearing operation that is the preparation for the gospel to come in. I love that last line, that it's the intellectual, moral, spiritual brush clearing operation. Because there's a lot of people have a lot of roadblocks that they need to get cleared away before they're open to hearing the good news. Some people see science and Christianity in conflict, like I said earlier. Some people can't get past the image of greedy, hypocritical pastors that dominate TV and movies. And some people have suffered legitimate spiritual abuse by former pastors or maybe even family members. Apologetics can be used to try and get past all of that. Sometimes you got to do a little extra work before the evangelism can be done. You got to clear away the brush and clear away the obstacles. And the third reason that we should use apologetics is to strengthen your own faith. I walked away from Christianity shortly after I went off to college, mostly because I had never heard Christians offering up any kind of intellectual defense of what they believed. It felt like reason and logic were on the side of the non-religious. But once I discovered apologetics, that all changed. When I first encountered apologetics, I was a spiritual person who still believed in a something, but I bought into a lot of the clever assertions about the Bible and how we didn't really know anything about Jesus outside of the Bible and how everything could be the path to God and Christianity was just some people's way. I bought into all that. And I thought these things because I had never heard anyone refute them. And they all sounded terribly clever and informed to me. So it wasn't until I started listening to William Lane Craig and Greg Koukl and guys like that I realized how terrible my arguments and objections were. I was just spitting out party lines without really thinking them through. But once I started studying the issues and arguments, it was like a floodlight was being shown on reality for me. And I was finally seeing things as they truly are for the first time. Our faith in God is kind of like standing on a Jenga tower. When we first come to Christ, we're all fired up and nothing can touch us. Over time, we start having questions. Some of us are taught that we can't ask those questions and we should just have faith. So, and you can imagine when that happens, maybe some of the Jenga blocks get pushed out of the tower. Now, the tower's still sturdy and you're still standing, but it's a little wobbly, not quite as sturdy. And then we start to see like clever slogans on social media or memes, or we hear assertions about Christianity that we have no response for. Maybe we have bad experiences with people in the church. And when that happens, more blocks get knocked out. And this continues on until finally the whole tower collapses and we fall to the ground. Our belief in God may completely damaged and maybe even unable to be repaired. When doubts arise, and make no mistake, they will arise, apologetics is like building up the Jenga tower and then slathering it in superglue. When life seems unbearably hard, if you've studied about God's character, you know He's in control and your suffering is temporary. If you studied about how the Bible is put together, you'll be confident that you can trust it and what it says. If you study a little about world religions, you can see how they can't all be true at the same time. If you study the arguments for God's existence, it'll only strengthen your faith and reassure you that the Christian worldview is the one that makes the most sense on how the world works. It also is the one that makes the most sense on why it's so messed up and how it gets fixed. The next question we have to ask ourselves is, who should do apologetics? Apologetics has seen this kind of tremendous resurgence in the past couple of decades, and there's a number of apologetics-focused ministries today. There's a lot of YouTube channels and blogs and things like that, and usually someone who focuses on apologetics is known as an apologist. And whenever my pastor introduces me to some new visitor to our church, he always says, "This is Dave. He's our apologist." And I consider that a tremendous honor when he does that, because he's recognizing my passion for the field. But here's the thing. There is no church office of apologist. The Bible lists the offices of the church as bishops, deacons, elders, and administrators. It doesn't list apologists. Why? Because we are all called to be apologists. Peter isn't giving instructions to a select few when he says we need to be able to give reasons for what we believe. He says we all need to be able to do that. Another way to say someone is giving reasons for something is to say they're making an argument. And we briefly touched on how arguments are constructed in the last lesson when we talked about truth. And we'll talk later about some of the exact arguments for God's existence. But for some people, using the word argument, that seems kind of counter to what Jesus taught, right? But that's because we're picturing heated discussions where people are yelling at each other. There's a difference, though, between giving an argument and being argumentative. Just think of arguments as making a claim and then backing it up with reasons. Still don't think Christians should argue? I'll bet you argue all the time over the things that you care about. If you're into sports, I bet you could argue all day long about who the best players have been on your team. And you could argue about what their best years were. And you could argue whether or not they're going to make it into the championship this year. I bet you could give reasons for why your favorite movie franchise is better than the other movie franchises. And in a house full of people, you better be able to make the case for why your favorite meal should be on the menu this week, or you're just going to be out of luck. So it's not that people feel uncomfortable making arguments. It's that they often don't do it when they feel their argument is very good. And their argument isn't very good because they lack the knowledge they need to make their case. So they don't say anything. The tagline for Legati Christi is Equipping Ambassadors for Christ. So it's my goal to equip you with the knowledge that you need in order to confidently discuss the Christian worldview. So these lessons will hopefully help you gain that confidence. Now let's talk a little bit about giving the arguments themselves, doing apologetics. And this class won't necessarily teach a lot on how to do apologetics. We won't discuss tactics and evangelism necessarily. But in everything that we assert, we will want to give reasons for why we believe what we believe. This is apologetics. Just as a way to kind of relax the mood on what arguments should look like, I'll briefly talk about it here, because I know the word argument makes some people uncomfortable. We have enough arguing going on over politics and cultural issues. Do we really want to act like that when we talk about Christ? The answer, of course, is no. We don't want our discussions to turn into heated shouting matches. And we aren't trying to win a logical grappling match either. The goal of arguing for Christianity isn't to win the argument. It's to clear away any obstacles that person may have that's keeping them from getting to the cross. In 1 Peter 3:15, Peter tells us that we should be able to give reasons for what we believe. And he also tells us how it should look. The verse ends with gentleness and respect. This is how Christians should differentiate their discussions from what we see happening all too often today. We need to treat people that we disagree with in a respectful manner. Our engagements need to look more like natural conversations and less like insult-laden mic drop rap battles. And notice I keep using this word discussion. The goal of apologetics isn't to train debaters, although I don't want to disparage people who get on stage and have debates. Those people provide a tremendous service to the kingdom when they get up like that in front of all those people and discuss these important topics. But debaters aren't the norm. Regular folk like us are the norm. We need to be apologists too. Our debate stage is going to be in line at the coffee shop or at the dinner table or hanging out with our friends. The goal of apologetics is to equip you well enough that you could talk about who Jesus was, what he did, and why Christianity makes the most sense just as easily and naturally as you talk about your favorite movie or your favorite book or your favorite era of music. Not as a debater in a public forum, but as a conversationalist talking about these things that you really care about. Finally, I'll leave you with this quote from Chuck Colson. It sums up well our calling as regular believers to be able to give reasons for what we believe and the kind of arenas it will be done in. If our culture is to be transformed, it will happen from the bottom up, from ordinary believers practicing apologetics over the backyard fence or around the barbecue grill.